THC that does have some medicinal purposes. It fights nausea. It's particularly useful for wasting diseases, some cancers. AIDS, it's good for AIDS to build appetite and make it possible for people to eat, continue to bring nutrition into their bodies. The thing is that THC was already legally available in a drug called Marinol. The advantage of Marinol over smoked marijuana is that Marinol is manufactured under FDA standards and can be controlled for dosage level and adulteration. And there is accountability in the manufacturer. You don't get any of that with smoked marijuana. And it is for that reason that no serious medical organization has looked on has endorsed smoked marijuana as medicine. Many of them support continued research, but none of them supports, on the present state of knowledge, medical knowledge supports smoked marijuana as having any legitimate medicinal purposes. This includes the AMA, the American Cancer Society, the American Academy of Pediatrics, and the National Multiple Sclerosis Society. Even though legalized, which will sometimes say that it's good for multiple sclerosis, the Multiple Sclerosis Society thinks otherwise. Am I over my time, or do I need more? I'm over my time. Well, you see, when I spoke at the Court of Appeal, they had a little red button. They don't have one here. That's okay.
Is my nose turning red?
Well, that was Bill Clinton's nose.
So we're going to avoid ad hominems here. I know. So, again, my extraordinary thanks to Bill, and you know, I want to be very, very clear, especially because I have an inclination to be cheeky and less serious, because that works well in the classroom, that these are serious matters, and that, in particular, the concerns that Bill is articulating are worthy of all of our collective concern. I do think, though, particularly knowing Bill's history and this being a Federalist Society event, the persistent concern by those on the right about a nanny state, that his own parable, his own sad real-world experience, essentially involved a mother saying to the big federal government, I needed you to be a better nanny. Why didn't you have the nanny state come in and be even tougher? Because apparently I, as a parent, was unable, of course she wouldn't say it in these terms, to control my own daughter, to get her the help that she needs. Why didn't the nanny state not only get involved, but force her to sit in a prison cell to save her life, right? I assume Mr. Otis wouldn't say, what a shame it is that Ted Stevens' conviction was overturned. Because gosh, if he had still been in a prison cell, he wouldn't have been in a plane crash and died. Right? Dangerous things happen all the time. To suggest that we ought to do things that are bad in themselves, and to hope that things will work out, that even worse things won't happen, again, is the ultimate logic of nanny statism. Let's have a nanny state because we trust the government to arrest the kids who are on a path to danger. And gosh knows, and Bill knows well, that letting the government do that is at a much bigger risk of hurting the poor and the minorities and those who are disfavored in our society, to let a majoritarian government pick and choose who do we need to arrest ahead of time. Heck, let's not even wait until they start doing drugs. We can know, based on education levels, based on socioeconomic status, based on race, culture, who's likely to end up doing drugs and creating other social harms. Let's not even bother waiting until they get started. We can intervene right at the beginning. Better yet, let's not let them have children, because we know their kids will be at risk. You take that logic, and again, if you're like a nanny state, you get pretty far, but we don't stop. What we particularly don't do, and again, I hate to turn Bill's own impassioned story against him, we don't tell the parents who themselves have failed in their own responsibilities, we're doing the best we can do when we're not. I don't think prison was the best place for that young girl to break her meth addiction and avoid ending up one of the many victims of their own addictions. I'm yet to see any evidence that prison is a healthy place to be, to avoid drugs, in fact. From what I know about prisons, which of course are the most prohibitory settings, the black market runs quite well there. Because people are going to do what they want to do. Now we can, and I think we should as a society, make efforts to help people live healthier, better lives. But there's no evidence that I know of that our criminal justice experiment, the idea that people in the throes of addiction, particularly young people, benefit from being locked in a cage and subject not only to the deprivation of liberty that locking somebody in a cage involves, but all of the stigma and collateral consequences that come from having a felony record, that come from the disruption in family and social engagement that the criminal justice system necessarily imposes on folks when it seeks to condemn and harm behavior. That's what makes the criminal justice system different. My first-year students know this. The criminal justice system is not a nanny state apparatus, as much as we might want it to be. If this is a profound public health problem, which I think it is, as is tobacco, as is alcohol, as are firearms, as are driving in the rain, or any other thing that produces harms, we should deal with it as a public health issue. And maybe I'm prepared to, in some sense I might be eager to, have a public health nanny state where the goal of the big government is to help people live healthier lives. That's not what the criminal justice system is about, and I think it's particularly dangerous to have a drug prohibition approach that we think is the best we can do to the extent it's about trying to help people live healthier lives. That serves to undermine the real value of the criminal justice system, which is to condemn misguided and harmful behaviors, and to harm the individuals who are inclined to engage in misguided and harmful behaviors. So I completely share Bill's instinct that we ought to be doing everything we can to try to reduce the deaths and the human misery that comes with drug abuse. But again, we've done the experiment through the criminal justice system. And if Bill can point me to experimental evidence that says, yes, we've reduced those harms, we've successfully diminished the curse and evils of drug abuse through using the criminal justice system, okay. And then again, I hope he will then follow up by saying, I'm prepared to use the criminal justice system to prevent people from having guns. I'm prepared to use the criminal justice system to prevent people from having dogs. I'm prepared to use the criminal justice system to prevent people from doing anything that the nanny state criminal justice system thinks is more harmful than beneficial, even to those individuals who themselves may not be able to control themselves. Even more fundamentally, and I use guns as a great example, he's absolutely right. There will be black markets. But the question isn't, will there be black markets? The question is, do we want to live in a society where we use crude prohibitions that have the risk of not only enhancing black markets, but funding money to those who are disinclined to follow the regulations that are in place, or instead to use regulatory mechanisms so those who are inclined to use these substances responsibly, whatever that may mean, and whether we're talking about cars, right? There's a black market in cars. There's all sorts of people who drive without insurance. And they get arrested, and we use the criminal justice system to deal with that. I'm not here to argue for eliminating the insurance mandate for driving. I do know that some of Bill's friends are troubled by an insurance mandate for health care. And I think they're often advocating the very same principles that I'm pushing forward to support decriminalization, which is we can't and shouldn't trust government. There it's government that's trying to help people through health care. Here it's government that's designed to hurt people and condemn people. But we shouldn't trust government, so say most of the folks on the right, to run a public health system, why would we then trust them to run the criminal justice system as a public health system? It could be, of course, that an awful lot of Bill's friends, Bill included, make a lot of money running the system that way. It's much more fun being a prosecutor than being a social worker, much more highly paid. There are lots of benefits that government actors get from running the criminal justice system as a public health system, just like there's lots of benefits in Chicago and DC when they prohibit guns. There's lots of money to be made through big government, and lots of fun to be had. And if Bill wants to say, I'm comfortable with misguided efforts to do that, the last point I want to highlight, and again, is let's really look at where the experiments have taken us. And let's appreciate the disinclination of most serious politicians to even open the door to the idea that the prohibition experiment has failed. Or put it differently, I really wish Obama was the new FDR, because FDR, especially at a time of economic crisis, had the courage and the conviction to say, and lead a repeal of alcohol prohibition, to say, we got it wrong. That's itself another aspect of what I think is desperately needed, not just in our debate over drug legalization, but also in our debate over every major public policy question that is hard. This is hard. It is challenging. But it doesn't help the debate to do what most of the proponents of drug prohibition have done, as Bill does in this debate. Well, let's look at some of those experiments. The problem is, these experiments are going on in laboratories where the big federal government is doing everything they can to make sure the experiment fails. Right? Until Attorney General Holder issued a memo, it wasn't just that the government wasn't supportive of medical marijuana initiatives. The doctors could and would get raided for doing what was legal under state law. The feds would prosecute a woman like Mrs. Raish, who, in order to deal with her own medical problems, grew a plant in her own backyard to smoke to make her feel better, and the feds come in and say, you can't do that. Well, where's the Commerce Clause here? Oh, you come on, Mrs. Raish. You know the Commerce Clause doesn't mean anything. Oh, and by the way, the liberals on the Supreme Court agree with us. Because big government likes to preserve itself. And it will particularly come into any experiment that runs the risk of showing the big government's a failure and knock over all the test tubes. And highlight, hey, look, this experiment failed. Well, what do you know? You knock over all the test tubes. It's hard to get your experiment to work. And I am the first one who will say, the experiment might be a disaster. That's why we need experiments. If I knew it was going to work, I wouldn't advocate experimenting. I don't experiment every morning when I get up about whether I'm going to try some orange juice. I like the taste. I have orange juice. I don't take tiny little sips and think, well, I like this time. We need experiments in part because we don't know what's going to happen. And there may be doctors in Colorado or California or potheads here or there who will spend lots of time, as it seems like they're already doing now, getting up, smoking a joint, playing Xbox. I assume Bill, and he could correct me if I'm wrong, won't want to prohibit Xbox and PlayStation and Wii, but my sense is there's a real close relationship between being stoned and spending time on those machines. And so if the goal is to make sure we get productive relationships, right, I mean, maybe, think of all those stoner movies that are out there. I mean, my God. We really need to get the people out there, the kids particularly, working hard. But it's not just prohibit marijuana. We got to make sure they don't have the fun things to do while they're sitting around stoned. This is the path to madness. Fortunately, that path hasn't led us to prohibit alcohol, to prohibit tobacco, to prohibit OxyContin, to prohibit a bunch of drugs that people use, the majority of people use responsibly and effectively. Whether their names are Michael Phelps, pot smoker that he is. I mean, he's obviously had a really detrimental experience. He's only won, 16 gold medals? Practices 12 hours a year. Yeah, no doubt, you have one toke. There goes your motivation. Well, maybe Andrew Sullivan, conservative blogger. He's really had a hard time with his pot smoking. Of course, neither of those folks face a